This Sunday, leaving the party. Arizona Senator Kyrsten Sinema says she is leaving the Democratic Party and registering as an independent.
I'm willing to work with anyone to get things done.
Her decision complicates Democrats' plans for the future and their hopes of holding control in 2024.
My stand today is about joining the many Americans who don't believe that any political party fits them perfectly.
I'll talk to Democratic Senator Jon Tester of Montana, who understands the challenges of being a Democrat in a red state. Plus, freed from Russia.
Welcome home, Brittney.
Basketball star Brittney Griner is freed from Russia in a prisoner exchange for a convicted arms dealer known as the Merchant of Death.
It was a dangerous concession to Vladimir Putin, and it will set a dangerous precedent going forward.
Is the U.S. putting more lives at risk with this deal? I'll talk to former U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara, who put the Russian arms dealer Viktor Bout behind bars. And liability. After his hand-picked candidate lost the Georgia runoff, Donald Trump is increasingly becoming a liability for his party and himself.
He's, if you will, the kiss of death for somebody who wants to win a general election.
Trump's company was found guilty of criminal tax fraud. More classified documents were discovered, and now the special counsel is moving quickly in its investigation. Could a criminal referral from the January 6th committee be the next shoe? Joining me for insight and analysis are NBC News Chief White House Correspondent Kristen Welker, NBC News Senior Capitol Hill Correspondent Garrett Haake, Democratic pollster Cornell Belcher, and Republican strategist Sara Fagen. Welcome to Sunday. It's Meet the Press.
From NBC News in Washington, the longest-running show in television history, this is Meet the Press with Chuck Todd.
And a good Sunday morning. Well, the Democratic Party's celebration of Raphael Warnock's Georgia victory, well, that lasted less than 3 days. On Friday, Arizona Senator Kyrsten Sinema poured some cold water on that celebration. She announced she's leaving the party to become an independent. It's a move that still leaves Republicans short of any sort of working majority or even a 50-50 designation. But this does complicate the Democrats' Senate and presidential math in 2024. Sinema's move, in some ways, is an exclamation point on a midterm cycle that was less an endorsement of Democrats than it was a repudiation of the Trump wing of the Republican Party. And Sinema appears to be trying to go where she thinks the voters have already gone. In Arizona, Democrats trail Republicans and independents in overall party registration. And nationally, voters are starting to opt out of either of the two major parties. In fact, according to Gallup, more Americans call themselves independents than Republicans or Democrats. And that's been true now for over a decade. In fact, in 19 of the 31 states that track registration by party, one of the two major parties is actually in third place behind either an independent or unaffiliated designation. In the Senate, Sinema has rhetorically leaned into an independent streak, but on governing, she has voted with Democrats 93% of the time. Now, she did block attempts to change Senate rules on the filibuster to pass voting rights legislation or to codify abortion protections. She also blocked an increase in the corporate tax rate, and she voted against raising the minimum wage with a visible thumbs down on the Senate floor. And for those actions, Sinema was censured by the Arizona Democratic Party earlier this year. Her Democratic colleagues and Democratic leadership in Washington were quite quiet when progressives unloaded on her earlier this year.
Two Democrats voted against us. That was a terrible, terrible vote. And I think what the Arizona Democratic Party did was exactly right.
I don't believe she's really given a compelling case as to why she should be renominated as the Democratic nominee for United States Senate in Arizona. She has proven herself an obstacle to the right to vote in the United States. She is not an ally on civil rights. She is not doing what voters in Arizona sent her to do.
So from her perspective, it was probably an open question whether progressive Democrats even wanted her in the party. Already in Arizona, Sinema's potential 2024 Democratic opponents are lining up to pile on the criticism. Congressman Ruben Gallego said Sinema is once again putting her own interests ahead of getting things done for Arizonans. And Congressman Greg Stanton tweeted that her party switch is about political preservation, and he signaled his own interest in running. So what are national Democrats going to do? Will the White House help clear the field and help Sinema? Because White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre called Sinema a key partner following her decision. I mean, she provided a lot of those bipartisan victories that Biden touts. But the president himself, has at times singled out Sinema negatively.
It sounds like you're putting the blame squarely on 2 U.S. senators for your inability to close that deal, Senator Sinema and Senator Manchin.
Look, I need 50 votes in the Senate. I have 48. 2 more Democratic senators in the United States Senate. I promise you. I promise you. We're going to codify Roe.
All right, so how are some other swing and red state Democrats responding to this Sinema party switch? Joining me now is Senator Jon Tester. He is the only Democrat elected to statewide office in Montana. In 2020, Donald Trump carried Montana by more than 16 points. In 2012, the last election, when Tester was on the ballot with the presidential campaign, Tester was able to run ahead of Barack Obama by 7 percentage points. Senator Jon Tester, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Good to be with you, Chuck. Thank you.
All right, so I guess on a scale of 1 to 10, to complete shock or this is just another day at the office, where do you put the Sinema changing her party affiliation to independent?
Look, I was surprised she made the change, but functionally, I don't think that changes a thing. I think we're going to continue doing the same thing that we were doing, whether she's an independent or part of the Democratic caucus, because she's going to continue to caucus with the Democrats. So we'll still have the committee structures that we've had before, as far as having one more Democrat. And functionally, I don't think it changes a thing. And then that's a good thing. So we look forward to working. I look forward to working with her, as I have in the past, to try to get good things done for the country.
I want to talk about that relationship. Look, Arizona Democrats are not happy with her at all. I want to just run down some of the critiques. The state party chair said she answers to corporations and billionaires, not Arizonans. The executive mayor of Lucha, a local organization down there, called it another unfortunate, selfish act. You have a progressive political consultant based in Phoenix, Ian Danley, saying everything she's done has been in service of Kyrsten Sinema. Is that your experience working with her?
No, look, I had a good experience working with Kristen on a number of different topics, especially the bipartisan infrastructure package that we put together with 10 folks, 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, of which I was one of the Democrats, and she was too. We worked hard together, we argued, and we fought, and we came up with a pretty darn good bill. And I think that's the process, Chuck. You know that. Your enemy one day is your friend tomorrow, and vice versa. And it's about keeping relationships in Washington, D.C. if you're going to get things done. And I think that Kyrsten Sinema knows that, and I think whether she's a Democrat or she's a Republican, that really doesn't matter. The label doesn't matter. What matters is you got to have somebody in Washington, D.C. that wants to get things done and move things forward. We certainly have enough obstructionists in Washington, D.C. So, look, I think she's got a pretty good track record of getting things done. Has she been perfect on everything from my perspective? No. But I haven't been perfect from her perspective either. So I think you just work together, you do things, and move the country forward. And I think that's what we did last Congress.
Let me ask you this, though. You know, you and her basically share the same position on the filibuster. Yet she was vilified for it. You have not. Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, I was for going back to the days of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington filibuster, where people talked and could hold the floor for weeks on end if they want. But in the end, it was a simple majority vote after the people got done with a talking filibuster. I think she had a different view, but I can't remember exactly what that view was on that.
Right, but it's more similar. You're not for just getting rid of the filibuster completely the way many of your colleagues are, correct?
No, that is absolutely correct. I think the filibuster does serve an important purpose, and it certainly is one of the things that makes the Senate different than the House, and thank God for that.
But do you think there are even 48 votes for your position in the Senate?
You know, it's hard to say. I mean, I think as with any piece of legislation or any policy or any rules reform, it's about explaining to folks, and by the way, I think this has to be done in a bipartisan way, and explain to folks about how this is going to make the Senate work better. I've always believed that if you're going to obstruct, you have to put some skin in the game, and I don't think right now folks who obstruct put any skin in the game. They can object, and they can walk away, and they can go home, and some of them have. And I think it's more important that they work at their obstruction. And look, if I want to obstruct a bill, I'm more than willing to do that. I'm willing to go down and hold the floor and get people with the same opinion to hold the floor with me. That puts leadership in a heck of a bind when it comes to the filibuster.
Right.
And so I think it does still keep minority rights, which is what the filibuster is about.
You know, you actually vote less with Joe Biden than Kyrsten Sinema does. You're comfortable being a Democrat in Montana. Why is that?
Look, I'm also a farmer, and I can tell you that we would not have the farm today if it was not for Democratic politics of FDR. And my grandfather and grandmother talked to us about that. My folks talked to me about that, and I will tell you that I am forever grateful for that because I'm blessed to be a farmer. I love agriculture, and I wouldn't be one without the Democrats.
Well, I say that because, you know, I'm sure you're going to get a lot of questions in Montana. Hey, why don't you leave the party? And you think that's going to be a good enough answer for that middle-of-the-road voter that you need to win?
I think what we need to focus on is what we've accomplished, whether it's for veterans, infrastructure, bringing jobs back to this country. The list is long. I've been able to do a lot of good things working with other people in a bipartisan way in the United States Senate, working for small businesses and working families and family farm agriculture. That's what I'm going to be talking about as a record of accomplishment if I choose to run. And if we're able to do that and get that message out effectively, I will win as I've won in the past. If we're not effective in that, of course, then it's going to be a different outcome. But I feel, if I decide to run in this thing, and it'll be a discussion that I have with my family over the holidays because it is a big undertaking, I feel good about my chances. People are going to come after me. They've come after me in the past. But nonetheless, that's politics, and we'll get through it and hopefully be successful come November of 2024.
Before I move on this topic, do you want to see Senator Sinema reelected?
Look, that's a choice for the Arizona voters, number one. And number two, I certainly have no bones to pick with Kyrsten Sinema. I think she's served this country well. Mm-hmm. And look, it will be a choice. Elections are about choices. Right. And the Arizona people are going to have a choice, whether it's a Democrat, an independent, or a Republican that represents them in the United States Senate, along with Senator Kelly. And they'll make that call based on probably the same kind of information they will in any state in the union.
Yeah, do you think Democratic leadership ought to give her some deference the way they give Angus King deference?
I mean, sure, I think they ought to try to treat everybody equally, for sure. And I don't know that Angus King gets deference.
Well, they don't field they don't fund a Democratic candidate out there.
Does a really good job.
Yeah, they don't fund a official Democrat in Maine.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, that may be the case. Mm-hmm. I'm not aware of that. But the truth is that Angus does a great job and deserves to be reelected in Maine. And one of my favorite people in the Senate, as a matter of fact. I really like this guy. He's done a great job and brings a great tool set to the Senate. And I think that's what it's based on more than anything else. It's how you performed. Are you a team player? Are you working together? Are you working to move the country forward? And they'll make that call. I can't say. I mean, that's really a call for the next chairman of the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee.
I want to talk to you a little bit about the midterms overall. I've had you on here to talk about Democrats and rural voters. I got to show you this number. You know, when you were last up for re-election, Democrats didn't get clobbered in rural America. In 2018, they got 42% of the vote. Republicans got 56%. That is a competitive landscape. It's why you won re-election. In 2022, a year that Democrats are claiming was a pretty good year, the split in rural America, Senator, 63-34. Democrats got clobbered in rural America. They only lucked out that turnout in rural America wasn't that great. What's got to change here?
We got to focus our message more on the things we're doing for rural America. I'll give you a prime example. I've got a couple bills that deal with big packers and meat consolidation and how the market, I believe, is totally manipulated. And if we can get those bills through, it'll allow for folks that are cow-calf operators to be able to make a living. If we're able to do that this Congress, Democrats will have done that. and hopefully there will be Republicans, and I'm sure there will be, as a matter of fact, because we've got Chuck Grassley on board and others, to get some of these bills across the line. But we need to talk about it, and we don't talk about near enough. The infrastructure package is a prime example. It's going to help rural America big time when it comes to broadband and electrical distribution and roads and bridges. We didn't talk about it. We didn't talk about it from a rural perspective. It has to be a concentrated effort, and we are very bad at message, and we need to work at that and get that message out to rural America so rural America knows who's fighting for them. And I think it's across the board. And if we're able to do that and do that effectively, Chuck, you'll see those numbers change.
I want to get to two issues, one that's pretty pressing here in the lame duck, the issue of the debt ceiling. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has said he wants to raise it with a bipartisan majority. I get that desire. But if you guys punt the debt ceiling issue, this lame duck, and Republicans use it to hold the economy hostage, to hold Biden hostage, what do you want to do? Isn't the blame on Democrats right now for not dealing with this problem, even though it may be a one-party vote?
No. This is an insane situation we're in that we're simply paying the bills like you would your credit card bill or your housing payment you make to buy your house. For Republicans or anybody to hold up the debt ceiling vote is political malpractice. It will raise interest rates across the board. We saw it happen the last time this was just talked about. And you cannot expect to be able to compete with a place like China, who's looking to replace us as an economic power in the world, if we're going to have these silly fights over debt ceiling. And they're silly fights. Look, if this is going to be the case, we ought to just change it. And when you vote for the bill, the debt ceiling vote goes right with it. So the bill goes up or down.
Would you just eliminate it at this point?
If that's what we're going to do. Well, I think, truthfully, that we can do just what I said, or we could let the president do it with an override of say a 2/3 margin from the Congress. But the truth is, to have this fight and hold the country hostage over something that truly could be very damaging to the economy of this country is nothing short of ridiculous. And it's why people don't like Democrats, they don't like Republicans, and they don't like Congress. This is a silly fight to be having.
Speaking of perhaps not liking Congress when they find out how many members of Congress took crypto money, let me ask you this. You've used some colorful language to describe crypto. You're not alone here. But should the government be regulating it or banning it?
Look, one or the other. I mean, I have not, it's not been able to pass the smell test for me. I have not been able to find anybody who's been able to explain to me what's there other than synthetics, and what means nothing.
Air.
Yeah, exactly. And the problem is that if we regulate it, and I pointed this out to some of the regulators here a week or two ago, if we regulated it, it may give it the ability of people to think it's real. I think it's, truth be known, my personal thought, and I'm not a regulator and I'm not a financial person that does regulation, but I see no reason why this stuff should exist.
Yeah.
I really don't.
I get that. And finally, on the prisoner exchange, Viktor Bout for Brittney Griner, what is your level of concern that this was a successful tactic for Putin?
Well, look, I think anytime we can get an American out of jail that's in prison improperly, I think we all ought to celebrate that. I think people can always say, well, we should have got more, or we shouldn't have done the deal at all. In the end, I can tell you for a fact that the State Department continues to negotiate for the release of other Americans that are out there. But I think in Brittney Griner's case, we ought to say, good for Brittney Griner. I'm happy for her. I'm happy for her family. I'm happy for America. And we need to continue to work to get the other folks out, too.
All right. Senator Jon Tester, Democrat from Montana. Always great to get your perspective on things. I'm curious, what do you think Governor John Dutton's doing these days?
He's out causing problems, I'm telling you.
There you go. We'll find out more tonight.
I'll be honest with you. Sounds good.
All right. Of course, referring to Yellowstone's, of course, fictional governor there. Senator Jon Tester, thank you. When we come back, more on Senator Sinema's party switch. What's the real impact? The panel is next. Welcome back, panelists here. NBC News Chief White House Correspondent Kristen Welker. She's also co-anchor of Weekend Today. NBC News Senior Capitol Correspondent Garrett Haake. Democratic pollster Cornell Belcher. And Republican strategist Sara Fagen. Well, Garrett, I think we will start here with your beat. Senator Sinema, what is her reputation on Capitol Hill? We know Democrats don't like her in Arizona. She clearly did not do her local politics. But senators do seem to like her. Is that the sense you get?
She's kind of an enigma. I mean, she tends to stick to herself. She's not as social with fellow Democrats. I mean, the person who I see her spend the most time talking to on the Senate floor is usually John Thune. And this is somebody who has good relationships across the aisle, but she can be difficult to deal with. I mean, we saw this even in the infrastructure negotiations, in other bills in which she was intimately involved. There was, in some ways, there was the Democratic position, there was a Republican position, and then there was trying to figure out what Kyrsten Sinema's position is. And unlike, say, a Joe Manchin, who also, can rub his colleagues the wrong way, there was never any question of what Joe Manchin wanted in these kinds of things. He was very outspoken about it. Sinema's simply much harder to read, and I think we're seeing that play out even now.
Let me play a video from her, Kristen, which really looks like the first bio spot for her reelection.
Registering as an independent and showing up to work with the title of independent is a reflection of who I've always been. And it's a reflection of who Arizona is. Nothing's going to change for me. And I don't think anything's going to change for Arizona.
Does anything change with President Biden's relationship with Kyrsten Sinema?
Well, the White House would like to say no. And I think it's notable that you played that video. It's almost like she's daring Democrats in the White House to run a progressive against her. White House officials say we haven't even had a conversation about that. The president has a good working relationship with Senator Sinema. They're trying to downplay this and point to her voting record. She's voted with President Biden the vast majority of the time. But I've really pressed them. What gives you that confidence that nothing's going to change from a policy perspective? They don't really have a good answer for that, Chuck. They can't say if she's given them
her vote wasn't exactly easy to get as a Democrat. So what's
and
the
negotiating was very tough. And I do think it becomes about 2024. Obviously, Arizona, an increasing number of independents. But this could be a real problem in 2024 for Democrats if she splits this into a three-way race.
You know, rank and file Democrats were having a good time passing around this tape that goes back to 2010. It's a younger Kyrsten Sinema. Take a listen.
Well, in the Senate, we no longer have 60 votes. Some would argue that we never had 60 because one of those was Joseph Lieberman. But that's whatever. So there's none of this pressure, this false pressure to get to 60. So what that means is that the Democrats can stop kowtowing to Joe Lieberman.
You know, Cornell, from 30,000 feet, it always seems to me that Sinema gets more grief for the same positions that maybe Manchin or Tester has. And I keep wondering, is it because they thought she was at heart a progressive and that this is sort of, she's a traitor, and they will point to her Green Party days or that?
Well, first, let me start with Arizona is becoming such a critical battleground state. And let's also notice that the president was out there this week, right? The president was out there this week talking about
Gave Ruben Gallego a ride on Air Force One, by the way.
Talking about the CHIPS Act, which is helping bring tech and manufacturing jobs back to Arizona. So tens of thousands of jobs to Arizona. I think we'd much rather be talking about that right now than Kyrsten Sinema. Voters, as you know, Chuck, will forgive a lot of things, but hypocrisy, as that's been shown right there, that is tough for them to get overlooked. Now, Tester said, from a functioning standpoint, nothing changes. And as you pointed out, I mean, she does vote with Democrats 93% of the time. I don't see this fundamentally changing any of what Chuck Schumer does in the Senate, any different than he was before she switched.
So let's talk 2024. You know, Arizona, there's a good pattern that you can see here, which is the party that is divided loses races. Okay? Democrats, Sinema, Kelly, and arguably even Hobbs didn't have a serious primary challenge. They did, and they won. When the Republicans with the tougher primary challenges, you know, and we've seen it in reverse. Jenna Napolitano was a two-term governor because no Democrat challenged her in a primary. What's going to happen?
Well, look, I think this move was the politically shrewd move on her part. It was really the only move she had if she wanted to get through a Democratic primary, in my view. And the Democratic Party attacking her as being a shill for corporations when she votes with her president over 90% of the time. I mean, that tells you everything you need to know about today's Democratic Party. I think in terms of what happens in 24, it probably depends more on the Republican primary and who is the nominee for the Republicans.
Carrie Lake is sitting there. Huh? What's that like?
Sure. If Carrie Lake is sitting there, it looks much easier for Kyrsten Sinema. If it's Doug Ducey, if it's Karen Robeson, all of a sudden Democrats are doing everything they can to keep that progressive out of the race.
Can I peel back the onion on this vote, on the idea that she votes with Biden 93% of the time? That's both a useful and a misleading statistic in some ways, because in the areas in which she broke from him the most are the votes that she prevented from happening. She made very clear she wouldn't vote to change the filibuster rules. And she made very clear she wouldn't vote for some of the tax provisions that were in BBB. Those never came to the floor, in large part because she opposed them. But she did support the president on, I believe, every single one of his judicial nominations. And that's basically all the U.S. Senate's going to be doing for the next 2 years. So if she keeps voting yes on Biden judges, she probably stays in the White House's good graces.
And I think that's such a great point, Garrett, and it's part of why negotiating with her is so frustrating. As you point out, a lot of times they don't know her position until the very end. But taking a step back, I think this moment also is just a reflection of how partisan the country has become. And if you look at the polls, a majority of voters are frankly just fed up with both parties.
Well, as I like to say, the Republican Party is the most unpopular, is a very unpopular political party. The Democrats are the second most unpopular political party.
Exactly.
These are not popular institutions.
Exactly. And the question is there going to be more momentum for the center and for people to come back to the center? And this is really, I think, highlights that.
Cornell, she wants to fashion herself as a McCain Republican. One of the things that we've made notice here is that the biggest difference between her and McCain is not being a thorn in the side of her own party. It's John McCain went out there and explained why he was being a thorn in the side of the party. I think the frustration with her, she never explains herself. And so she becomes a two-dimensional figure, easier to caricature, where John McCain, because he was out there all the time, he was harder to caricature.
Look, you just had a Democrat win that seat, Senate seat by, 5 points? That's pretty darn good in a state that has traditionally been red, and running on, quite frankly, a lot of things that she already voted for, right? But it is retail politics 101. If I had one really sort of major criticism, aside from what the left is doing, coming at her for, retail politics, Chuck. You got to do your retail politics.
It's pretty clear she didn't do the little stuff at home.
She has not been doing the basic retail politics.
Manchin, Tester, they don't allow that stuff to fester. She did. She almost enjoyed the festival.
Listen, but look how Tester, that interview with Tester explaining why he's a Democrat and why he's taking the stance. You don't have to, people don't want you to be with them 100% of the time, but they want to understand you.
I think it's a good point. However, I would say any break with the orthodoxy of the Democratic Party, which is increasingly progressive, means that you are cut out. And, she is really an example of that. She challenged her party, and as a result of it, she was going to be primaried.
Is this going to get contagious if she's successful, Garrett? How many other senators would secretly wish they could actually go outside the party structure?
I don't think so. I mean, I still think, given how partisan the country has become, to Kristen's point, the party's going to do you more favors than not, the way, and especially in a 50-50 Senate. I mean, I think to the degree over the next 2 years, whether we have functionally a 51-49 Senate or a 50-49-1, will show us. I mean, the idea of being a team player. If she operates like Bernie Sanders or Angus King, it's a wash. But if she really tries to hold herself apart in the way that Evan McMullin, for example, held himself out to do if he had won in Utah, we're looking at a very different picture.
That's why I thought Jon Tester's answer to you was so interesting when you asked him, are you comfortable being a Democrat in Montana? And clearly he is. He talked about FDR and the importance of continuing that. And so I think that it is a very risky strategy, Chuck. It's not clear a lot of people will be following
especially when she acts like a hermit and does that. That's the issue.
Well, really quickly, look. No, there's not going to be this movement because you know how much a Senate race costs? All right, no, there's not going to be an independent movement. You need the party structures.
That is probably an extraordinarily important point. All right, party switching, of course, not unheard of in the United States Senate. According to the body's historian, 21 senators have changed parties while serving in the upper chamber since 1890. Wayne Morse is my favorite example. He was a Democrat, an independent, and a Republican at one point in the state of Oregon. But the last time a Democratic senator did this was in 2006, Connecticut's Joe Lieberman. He was hurt by his support for the Iraq War inside the Democratic Party, lost a primary because of it. He chose to run as an independent in the general election, and he won. Lieberman explained his decision to become an independent Democrat on this program right after that election.
I'm going to continue to do what I've always done, and even more so, which is to work across party lines with my colleagues to get things done for my state and country. To me, that is my singular mission, and I'll work with anybody I agree on. I'm not going to agree with on a matter. I'm not going to look at party labels. I'm going to look at what can we get done for our country and my state.
Up next, he's already admitted he took the highly classified documents to his Florida home. So will Donald Trump ultimately be punished for that crime? Former U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara is here to discuss. Welcome back. American basketball player and two-time gold medalist Brittney Griner is back in the United States. She touched down in Texas on Friday for medical evaluation, reunited with her wife Sherelle after 294 days in Russian captivity, including at a penal colony. New video released by Russian state media appears to show Griner working in one of Russia's penal colonies where she spent the past month. Griner was exchanged for Russian arms dealer Viktor Bout. He was nicknamed the Merchant of Death. He had served nearly 11 years of a 25-year sentence in the United States on charges including conspiring to kill Americans. Many Republicans are criticizing this swap.
We should have never released Viktor Bout. It was a dangerous concession to Vladimir Putin, and it will set a dangerous precedent going forward.
Prosecuted Bout in his role as U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York.
Accused arms dealer Viktor Bout begins to face American justice. The so-called Merchant of Death is now a federal inmate. No one should ever think that he can plot to kill Americans with impunity.
And Preet Bharara joins me now. Preet, welcome to Meet the Press.
Good to be here.
Let me start with what you can tell us about Viktor Bout. How dangerous of a man is he?
Dangerous man. I don't know who that young guy was you had on the screen a moment ago.
He looked good. He said promising future.
I don't recognize that
promising
person.
future in television and radio.
Look, everyone is happy, if you're an American or not an American, that Brittney Griner, who is, I think, unfairly and illegitimately detained in Russia, is back home with her family. We're happy for her. We're happy for her family. At the same time, you might imagine that not as just a general prosecutor, but the prosecutor who oversaw the prosecution and conviction of Viktor Bout has a view about how dangerous a person he was. He's, as you said, someone who was convicted at trial by unanimous jury of conspiracy to kill Americans. He was convicted of conspiracy to provide material support to terrorists. He's on tape with confidential informants, planning to sell hundreds of surface-to-air missiles to the FARC, also sell 30,000 AK-47s to the FARC for the stated purpose of shooting down American helicopters in Colombia. So he's a dangerous man then. I don't know how dangerous he is now.
Right.
Presumably, I have a lot of respect and trust in the Biden administration, is his ability to engage in trafficking of armaments at a time when Russia is at war with Ukraine. Is it diminished? Is he operational still possibly? I don't know the answers to those questions.
Right.
But I think people of good faith can, in good faith, ask questions and be concerned about it, even when we're very, very happy that Brittney Griner is back in the U.S.
What does this do? Does this hurt morale at Justice Department? Does it? I mean, I know. Look, officially, Justice was against this decision, but they would always have been. This is standard policy to be against that. But does it sap morale?
I don't know.
Okay.
Look, prosecutors generally, when they've held someone accountable, particularly a dangerous person like Viktor Bout, are not excited about letting them out of prison early. He served 15 years, another about 7 to go. And they certainly are not excited about it as a general principle when it's an asymmetric trade, someone who's very, very dangerous being traded for someone who hadn't really done anything wrong. But I think reasonable minds at the Justice Department understand that they have a particular role to play and a particular advocacy to engage in, and it's not ultimately their decision. And I'm sure Merrick Garland and others understand that there are other considerations, there are diplomatic considerations, and of course, you want to bring Americans home. And I don't know that it saps morale because they're professionals, as I would have been in this situation as well.
But you're certainly not happy. That's probably the
It's not happy. I think it's, there's some concern, not just about this particular trade, but as some people in good faith, I'm not talking about the politicians necessarily, who wonder and worry that if you engage in this kind of trade, deeply asymmetrical trade, Does it put other Americans in harm's way in the future?
We don't negotiate with terrorist organizations unless we do. We don't negotiate for this stuff unless we do. It does feel like we don't have a policy on this anymore.
I can't speak to that.
Yeah.
I just think that it is, at a time when it's very, very political, and you played some politician statements, there are people who don't like Joe Biden's politics. There are people who don't like Brittney Griner's politics. I would hope that there'd be some room for reasonable debate on both sides of the aisle about what the policy should be.
I want to move to all of the various Trump investigations. There was a lot of movement this week. A federal judge decided not to hold Trump in contempt over these classified documents. I guess the question is, he's already admitted he took it. What do you think Justice is waiting for?
Oh, the Justice Department? Oh, yeah. Look, I think they're, to coin a phrase, loaded for bear.
Yeah.
They've appointed a special counsel, Jack Smith. There are a number of very seasoned prosecutors, two of whom I worked with very closely at the Southern District of New York when I was U.S. Attorney and before that, who I think are brought on for purposes of figuring out if there's a triable case, a chargeable and triable case. And I don't think they would have left their former positions, both in government and in private practice, unless there was a serious possibility that the Justice Department was on a path to charge. And
is your definition of triable case meaning you can win it, you have all the evidence, or that because you can have all the evidence but not win a trial, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are intertwined.
Yeah.
They're not going to proceed. You generally do not proceed unless you have a great likelihood of success. But the prerequisite is that you believe that the person is guilty of the crime, right? And when you're charging somebody in maybe the highest stakes trial in some ways in history, because it's a former president of the United States, you've got to have all your ducks in a row.
I was just going to say, as a prosecutor, you're going to say, hey, look, politics isn't supposed to enter this. But it does. How does it?
Well, I don't know that politics enters it. I think prosecutors have to be careful about having public trust, right?
Political fallout, yeah.
Yeah, you keep wanting to use the word politics. I don't want to use that word. If you, the famous phrase, if you run at the king, you best not miss. There are a lot of people who are going to be opposed to this prosecution. So, like any prosecution, you want to have your T's crossed and your I's dotted, and you want to have proof beyond a reasonable doubt, and you want to have a strong case. I think you want to have an exceptionally strong case when you're bringing it in a context in which, I'll use your word, things are very politicized, right? To show that not just the jury in the case, but the public at large, that it was a righteous case, it was a meritorious case, and you have the goods.
Here's a question that a lot of people have been asking, and I know you weren't involved in this case, but the Manhattan DA got a conviction on the Trump Organization. Essentially, they got the conviction by proving Donald Trump's culpability in this tax fraud scheme. What is preventing them from bringing charges against him, in your view?
I don't know. I don't love to comment on other people's cases and why they bring them. But look, there's a reason why they didn't bring the case against Donald Trump or an individual. In any organization, there can be, depending on what the emails are, depending on what the communications are, depending on what the testimony is, depending on whether or not there's a cooperator, and there was of the sort in this case, there's plausible deniability about the knowledge and intent of the person at the top. And in all these cases, whether you're talking about Mar-a-Lago, whether you're talking about January 6th, or whether you're talking about the Trump Organization that the Manhattan DA's office looked at, it always comes down to what can you prove about the intent and the mindset and knowledge of the person at the top. And they probably didn't have it.
The January 6th committee is likely to issue some criminal referrals to justice, they say. Without getting, we don't want to prejudge that, but of the committee, what you saw and what the committee has produced, do you think they've made their case against Donald Trump?
Well, look, it is not their role to make a criminal case, although they're making the referral. And, I guess people can debate what the value and virtue is of making a criminal referral.
I can argue both sides of that, good or bad, right?
I mean, to me, it's largely symbolic because at the time we first started having this debate about a referral, it wasn't clear how far along the Justice Department was. Since then, the Justice Department has appointed a special counsel, as we mentioned, and they have a lot of staff that they've added to the matter, and they're far along, and they've issued subpoenas that we've heard reports about. So they're investigating this thing anyway. So what additional?
Do you think a criminal referral actually complicates things more than it helps?
I don't think it complicates things. I don't think it does. I actually don't think it does anything for the Justice Department. I don't think it prompts them to do anything more quickly or more aggressively.
But it doesn't add negatively to the political stew? The word you don't want to use?
You could argue that. I don't know why they feel the need to do it. I think they want to make a statement for themselves. I think it has no impact on the Justice Department whatsoever.
Preet Bharara, the former U.S. Attorney for SDNY, who has a fabulous podcast, by the way, that
Thanks.
I've both been on and listened to. It's good to see you.
Thanks, Chuck.
Good to have you here. When we come back, the 2022 midterms are finally over. I swear. What lessons can we learn? We're going to go inside some of the key counties we were tracking next. Welcome back. It's Data Download time. This week's Senate runoff win by Democrat Raphael Warnock in Georgia marked the official end of the 2022 midterms. And with that, we want to take a look at what we learned from our County to County project. This is the set of hand-picked counties that we here at NBC News have used to try, all across the country, try to examine how different segments of the electorate voted this cycle. Younger voters, rural African Americans, evangelicals, working class voters, and Chamber of Commerce Republicans. So let me start here with rural African Americans. This was a key place to look to see, could Democrats flip North Carolina? Well, you can see here in Anson County, the answer is no, and here's one reason. Beasley underperformed Biden and Anson, and you saw turnout in general. She underperformed in all the rural African-American counties in North Carolina. Chautauqua County, Georgia, this is a big evangelical county. Marjorie Taylor Greene's district here. This was a case where not how Welker was going to do in Georgia. He did really well here, but whether he was going to get the evangelical turnout. And only 70% of the presidential vote from 2020 turned out in Chautauqua. This was a problem all across the state for Welker and why he ended up losing. Let me take you to Dane County. This was our check-in on young voters, home of the University of Wisconsin. Here, Democrats did really well. 90% of the presidential turnout showed up in 2022. Mandela Barnes did better in Dane County than Joe Biden did. Barnes didn't lose Wisconsin because of young voters not showing up. He lost Wisconsin because he underperformed in Milwaukee, by the way. Meanwhile, Delaware County, Ohio's our check-in with Chamber of Commerce Republicans, and you could tell Mike DeWine did really well in this county. He is more of a center-right Republican. Look at how J.D. Vance, a Trump Republican, did. He still carried it, but by double digits less than what DeWine got. It tells you there's a problem growing here if you're a Trump Republican in some of these places. Luzerne County is a former Democratic Union county that had moved towards Trump. Well, I'll tell you this, Democrats carried it in the governor's race, and Fetterman did better than Biden here, indicating that the Trump nominees turned off even some Trump-leaning voters in a county like Luzerne. Up next, Republicans suffered another midterm loss in this Georgia runoff this week, why the GOP is starting to say out loud that Donald Trump is a real liability for his party. We are back. All right, so Donald Trump officially cost them another Senate seat. Sara Fagen, I want to play, I know we've been here before. I guess the question is it different this time? Here are some Republican senators who I think hoping that it's different this time. Take a listen.
He's, if you will, the kiss of death for somebody who wants to win a general election. And at some point, we've got to move on.
Was he a factor? I don't think there's any question about that, because a lot of the candidates that had problems in these elections were running on the 2020 election being stolen. And I don't think independent voters were having it.
What you can't say objectively is that those candidates most closely associated with former President Trump underperformed. That is objective.
Sara Fagen, I mean, Georgia's the best example. Yeah. This was a state that voted Republican in every race except one statewide.
Yeah, I mean, Donald Trump has cost Republicans the Senate twice now. I mean, I don't think that's really in doubt. Look, the silver lining of this election, perhaps for Republicans, is that our senior leaders are now saying out loud what they've been thinking for a while, and we're going to need more of that. Mm-hmm. I think it's more profound at the statewide level than it is at the House. I think we're not going to see that trend as much in the House as you head into 24.
You buy what Peggy Noonan says, that if you really want Trump to go away, the voters have to be the final arbiter.
I completely agree. And I think the future of the Republican Party is so dependent on this next presidential election. Does he run and lose by the vote? Or does he succeed, in which case he really cements his hold on the party?
Cornell, the victorious Democratic coalition of the last, I'd say, 2022, so 3 cycles in a row, Donald Trump's played a huge part in it. If Donald Trump is not there, how concerned are you about carrying places like an Arizona and a Georgia?
Well, I think part of the problem is that if Donald Trump isn't there, look at the base of the Republican Party. Look who's choosing these nominees. Herschel Walker was such a terrible candidate. The Republican primary voters picked him. Go out to Arizona where you think you had these terrible Trump candidates. The Republican primary voters chose them. So even if Trump doesn't go away, I still like the odds that they're going to continue to pick these Trump-like individuals.
Trump is showing up and doing events for them, and that's a big part of this.
Yes, but they're also carrying his water. Look, masters in this sort of anti-Semitism, racist, replacement theory crap that you get from Donald Trump, you're getting from an awful lot of these Republican candidates.
I do think what makes this moment feel a little bit different, it's way too soon to say that it is, you do have more Republicans who are circling the wagons, former administration officials saying they're prepared to face off against him. John Bolton, for example, this week saying in the wake of former President Trump saying he's going to rip up the Constitution, Bolton saying, look, we have to stop him. I'm prepared to get into the race to try to be one of those people who does it. And I think it's not just all of the different areas that we're talking about, the fact that he endorsed Herschel Walker, handpicked him in all of these candidates. It's also his messaging. The fact that he has depressed early voting, Chuck, and that was such a key part of why Senator Warnock held on to his Senate seat, and Republicans are really upset about that.
Garrett, you know what we couldn't have done today? I couldn't put together a mash of Republican members of Congress talking about all the good things Donald Trump does bring to the party right now. And I'm curious, who are his chief? Does he have a group of Republicans that can basically buck him up in Congress for the next year?
Oh, absolutely. It's the House Republican Conference who are all going to have to run potentially with him on the ballot in 2024.
Some of them want to run with him on the ballot.
Absolutely, they do. And they want to run with him on border issues. They want to run with him on the perception of Washington corruption. Look, Trump has probably never been weaker, but he's still... Republicans are going to have to beat him twice if they're going to have him not be the nominee. You got to beat him electorally in the primary. You have to beat his ideology, because if you leave a wounded Trump kind of alive on the battlefield after a primary season, he's not just going to go away.
5% of always Trumpers, 5% makes it impossible for Republicans to win, right?
Oh, I don't think so. I mean, look, we've seen examples of Republicans like Governor Kemp standing up to him and winning in a primary against a well-known individual. So I mean, look, he is very popular. He is probably 50% of the primary electorate. That is no small number.
More than enough.
Boy, that's I mean, if it's that good, he's the nominee.
Yes, but we don't know how this plays out when there's 10 candidates and the coalitions and the debate that occurs. I think he's beatable.
Mitt Romney, Alan Simpson, Jack Kemp, all those Jeb Bush, all those mainline Republicans, they're not walking back in that door because the primary voters aren't going to let them.
And on that point, that's all we have for today. Thank you for watching. We'll be back next week, because if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press.
Celebrating 75 years of Meet the Press, the longest-running show on television.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.